Good morning and welcome to Career Launch Live. I'm your host, Catherine McCord. I'm so sorry that we're late. We apparently had some tech issues, but we're going to dive right on into today's topic, which is happiness in the workplace. And I have with me Pamela Gail Johnson to discuss that topic. Pamela, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Pamela Gail Johnson. I actually met Kath of my Society of Happy People that I started in 1998. She was one of our podcast guests for last year's Happiness Happens month, which we've been celebrating for 25 years. And otherwise, I write about happiness. I talk about happiness. I try to help people elevate their energy in life, at work, and at home, because happiness is a high vibing type of energy that we all want to feel more of. That's in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And in the workplace, I think it's really underrated. So, people don't understand how much happiness can really affect how productive you are, how healthy you are, so you'll lower call outs, you'll lower stress, you'll make people happier, they'll stay with you, which ups retention, then productivity goes up, innovation, creativity, all of these types of things. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is what are some of the factors that create happiness and satisfaction in working?
So happiness and I'm sorry, you kind of cut it out a little bit, and maybe I'm cutting out.
Yeah, I think you're having some tech issues. You were cutting out a little bit. So happiness, what are some of the factors that create happiness and satisfaction in the workplace?
Well, for us, we list satisfaction actually as one of the types of happiness, because I think one of the ways we increase our happiness, especially at work, is when we broaden our definition of it. And so when we realize it's easy to think of happiness when we're out having fun and everything's like, oh, yay, this is really cool. And you're in that kind of flow. But sometimes happiness is relief that we finished a project, or the satisfaction that we actually did a presentation and it really did go off, with flying colors. There's a satisfaction like, oh, we did it and we did a good job as a team, or as an individual contributor to a project. So I think one of the best ways to increase our happiness at work is really make note of every time we do something where we feel good. I sort of make the definition of happiness super simple. It's when we naturally feel good. And a lot of experiences create
So
that
real
feeling
quick,
of
when you
good.
say naturally feel good, can you clarify that? Because I think that might confuse some of the audience members because you're
Um,
not talking about just like, like you should always perpetually be happy. That's not what you mean.
Of course, no, not at all. But I think every time we do something and we actually feel good, and like I said, sometimes feel good is something, it's relief. Sometimes we're like, oh, that project is cleared off my desk or off my calendar, and it's relief. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm laughing and having this like good time. And I added the word naturally in there. Um, I did that because I don't want people thinking like, oh, if you're out getting drunk and you would consider yourself feeling good because you just drank five shots
Right.
of something,
Right.
and you're I'm in a wee state, you may or may not be happy in that wee state. Like you'd have to take into a lot of factors. That doesn't mean if you're on an antidepressant, that's like you're naturally feeling good. That's the part of your health management plan. But it is to say, like, more natural states of feeling good um that's not induced by
Right. Right.
voluntary
Sort of the
things.
more
So some
natural.
reasons I added natural. But
Okay.
natural
Very cool.
natural in there.
Yeah,
But like
because
I said,
it
it's not
does
to take away
make a
from
difference.
healthcare.
Oh,
Healthcare is
right.
a
Yeah.
different thing.
Right. Right. Right.
It's a totally different thing. It's not to take away from that word. Like when I go take my high blood pressure medication, I take that because it keeps my blood pressure down, which helps me obviously be happier. Same
Oh,
thing
right.
applies
Yeah.
to other things. So I always want to clarify that. But if the only time you feel good is a happy hour, then we need
That's
to
the
kind of help
problem.
raise your
Well,
vibe.
that's a whole that's a whole other series of conversations that we can have another
Exactly.
time. But it is one of those things too. I think that in the workplace we have to learn to, especially I think at work, but really in life, you have to learn to adjust what happiness can mean. right? And what that means. So one of the things that you and I discussed when I was on your show or in your series was the importance of integrity in happiness.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to hit on that because that's so powerful and it's so true that people forget that. But when you lose your integrity, you're just kind of lost and floating, and it can make you feel bad that your integrity is not in line because it affects your psyche, which then affects your body because we are holistic beings. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So can you hit on the importance of integrity and happiness?
Well, I think integrity, like in your topic, and I linked to the interview on my LinkedIn post, your topic was being honorable. And I think a lot of times at work, we can be, sometimes when we just don't even say something, like we choose not to comment, like maybe we get credit for something that somebody else did and we don't correct it. We go home and we're not being, integrity is gone because we were not being honorable. We were not, it impacts our confidence. Confidence is another type of happiness. We feel good when we're doing something because we're confident. We know we do a good job at it. Our integrity goes away if 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 we're not living that authentic self, if we're not really doing that. And sometimes we have to pick the right politically correct time to do something, or we have to maybe think how we should say it. We can't always just be overreactionary. We want to make sure we're doing it in an appropriate way at work. I mean, in life too, but definitely at work. Like, it's one thing you can kind of sometimes yell at your best friend or something, like you can just off the top say something that maybe you shouldn't have, so you can apologize later.
And I want to hit on
But
this
at work, you
too
sometimes have
because
to think through that.
well, right, and you should anyway. I'm with you. You should do that anyway. But I also want to hit on the fact that sometimes it's okay to be assertive and even aggressive in the workplace because there are certain times that certain things are just not acceptable. So, for instance, I had a situation in the workplace arise at one point in which a manager was overtly sexually harassing a woman during a company meeting. And she just called it out. And I mean, not even particularly politely. And
How long ago was that?
how long ago was that? That was 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
5 or 6 years
In the
ago.
past decade.
Yeah, in the past decade. Oh yeah, and I'm not the only one who has stories like this. Um, and I have my own story that's happened in the past decade where I had to shut somebody down. But it was it's just one of those things that, if some people go, oh, well, she didn't handle it the best. Well, that's BS. If someone's coming at you in front of other people, you are not to blame. They are. Period. End of story. The end. And I think it actually ups the honorable factor and the integrity factor that you stand up for yourself. Now, she didn't name call him. She didn't, none of that, but she shut it down. She said, it is not appropriate for you to discuss my body in a meeting. It's unbelievable to me that you would think that that's acceptable. I need you to stop right now. The end. And he tried to open up his mouth and she said, Etch! No. Just shut it down. And, it's one of those things that to me, that made me happy because I was like, yeah, she stood up for herself. So I wanted to kind of hit on that too. So when it comes to these awkward situations, where do you fall to get your happiness back? What do you do?
Well, I think after you do that, your confidence should definitely go up. If you have the if it's in you, because you can't do something like that, like you said, unless you're sort of confident and have
right.
handled it really well. So if you're like not in that place, because I suspect he's done inappropriate comments before, so she was prepped for it. I mean, it usually doesn't just happen. Like the first time it happened to any of us, we're always a little bit like,
you're like, what?
Like, what? But by the second or third time, you can prep your line. And I think everybody maybe even needs to have a buddy that if you have to have that, like, oh, next time he does X or next time she does X, because I've seen it happen to men too. I've seen women managers make comments about bodies and stuff. It's not completely gender specific. And so for them to have like you said, a strong comeback. Did you ever watch Designing Women?
Oh yeah. Oh God, yes. I have
Makes it
so many stories.
harder.
My mother is basically Julia. So yeah, huge fan. Huge fan
Yeah.
of that.
I just always thought she had the best way to put somebody in their place in a very
Yeah.
polite yet assertive way. Like,
Yeah.
no, we're not doing that. And I think that is one of the few places people need to role play more. How do we have that awkward conversation? And sometimes
Yeah.
it is going to be in a meeting because you do have somebody that just maybe it's just a coworker, not a manager, but they're making inappropriate comments that make you uncomfortable. And and it's a good thing that we're at a point we can say those things, because I remember
Yes.
being in sales and somebody's looking at me and calling me hun and dear and darling, and you're like, I'm like, I'm a
Come
college
on.
graduate,
Come on.
I'm a professional woman, I'm not a hun, I'm not a dear, I'm not darling, I'm certainly not any of those things for you.
Right. And I like to say this is my general guideline because I have had a lot of people go, well, some things are cultural, blah, blah. I'm like, eh. But here's the thing. So here's the rule from an HR perspective is if you don't want someone of the same sex saying those things to you, don't say it to them. Don't say it to somebody else. So guys, if you don't want another man touching your waist, or touching your arm, grabbing hold of your arm to escort you somewhere, or calling you hun or darling or cutie, don't don't do it. It's gross. So that's just a general rule of thumb. So my husband actually came up with that one, and I love it. So back to so we talked
And
about
it's true.
sometimes you have to, yeah, and sometimes you have to stand up for yourself to regain your confidence and your honor, and that's part of getting your happiness back. But let's talk too about building psychological safety so that people in the workplace, so that people can feel comfortable to express themselves and also to dissent, which for anybody who doesn't know, that's all psychological safety is about the comfort to be able to speak up, express ideas, and to be able to dissent without fear. So let's talk a little bit about how to establish that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think those all fall into, as when I talk about energy and the energy of happiness, I think happy people, if you're coming from a positive perspective, because some people don't understand how they're communicating is not giving you safety. Like a lot of people
Right.
just don't get
Right.
it. Like it's just above their whatever emotional
And I want to
IQ.
be real quick.
So if
I
you're
want to hit on
having
this.
happy
So we're not
people,
real quick. We're not just talking about physical, and I'm sorry, we're having some tech issues too. I think that's causing some issues. But um we're not just talking about physical safety here. We're talking and that somebody might be bullying you or something like that. That's not just what we're talking about. There is a lot of verbiage out there that just shuts people down emotionally and mentally and tells them this is not a place for you to speak. And so that's also what we're talking about. I just wanted to clarify that. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pamela.
well, yeah, there is that, and I think in that particular case, let's say somebody in a meeting shuts you down all the time. I think it's time you have a one-on-one conversation and say, I don't know if you realize it, but when you say XYZ to me, it makes me feel like I shouldn't continue my conversation. Is that what you're trying to do? And if they, like if you don't want my input on blah blah blah, project whatever it
Right.
is, and they may not want that. And I think sometimes in a workplace you have to respect it, but you can at least have that conversation. And if you have retaliation about it, you may need to go to HR. That is why they're there, if they
Yes.
start retaliating about you. But you do have some situations at work that maybe they don't really want everybody's opinion, and they're not trying to be they're trying to pretend they're open door, but they're not, because it's like I was a sales rep, and there were many times we would have leaders come in and say, so the tower is now wanting us to do XYZ. And we're like, okay, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And I actually looked at a manager once and said, when is so-and-so going to be at our regional office? I'm like, I want him to sit with me on call day, and I would like for him to show me how he's doing that in that timely manner he's thinking I'm going to do it. Because obviously I've been doing it 5 years and I don't know how to do that. He's
Right.
like, you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I would actually like to ask him, because he's setting this expectation that's not
Unreasonable.
realistic.
Yeah.
It's not even remotely
Yeah.
realistic. And so she was like, because we didn't have an open culture, we didn't have a psychologically safe culture, and it was a decade ago. So sometimes people don't want that. And so I think
Right.
even getting that clarity on that helps. And if they are shutting you down and they really did want your opinion, they may not realize that that's what they're communicating to you and probably others on the team. But again, I think there's a time and a place to to do it, and trying to do it in a
Right.
private manner first, if possible.
Right.
Um,
100%.
if possible. It may not always be, especially, but if it's mostly just like I said, genuine stuff. But I think there's a way you kind of triage it, to have that conversation. We
Right.
we've kind of forgotten how to have in-person conversations because we've gotten so tech focused, and tech doesn't come across the same way,
It's
as
true.
when we're talking in person. So I think
It
it's
is
always,
true. And
even if you have to Zoom somebody.
right. And that is, it can be both fortunate and unfortunate, that we are doing so much with tech these days. But I think that, it is really important to have those conversations, to talk to people, folks. Some of this is on you, because I hear a lot of people, oh, well, I'm not comfortable. Oh, okay. Well, then what are you going to do? It's not on other people to bend. And I used to have, it was really funny because at two different jobs, I was told, well, people don't feel like they can, people are afraid to talk to you about this. And I'd say, oh, okay, what am I doing? Well, it turns out it wasn't that I was doing anything. It was that they just were they just had a lot of fear about speaking up and raising
Mhm.
questions and that kind of thing. Well, what was I supposed to do about that? I had, made it very clear I would ask them, I would ask their opinions, I would all this, and they would just not give them. So what was I supposed to do with that? So now, older, further down her career, Catherine has learned some tricks of the trade, right, that actually do help with that. But it was also on them too. If somebody gives you the floor and says, hey, I want to hear from you, I want to know what's going on, speak up. you know
Well,
um
especially if you disagree or have a different opinion or a different idea that you want to toss into the
yeah, yeah,
mix.
speak up, take your turn, take up
But I
your
think
space.
that's a skill, and the newer someone is to an organization or into their career, that is also where I think the leaders, again, that role play buddy, if
Right.
there's something
Yeah.
they're having a hard time having a conversation about, talk to one of we used to have a time in the workplace that we got assigned like a mentor. Your
Right.
first X number of days you'd have a mentor, and there's sometimes you may get assigned one, but it's still not a reality. But there's now so many coaches professionally. There's just a lot of
Oh yeah.
avenues
Oh yeah.
that if you're someone who has a hard time speaking up, again, role play it so you have the confidence to say it to the person you need. Because a lot of times, and I'm one of these people, um, confident people sometimes just come across, and you want other ideas because you want to make sure you're not missing anything, because that's what makes you usually good, because you've pulled together a lot of pieces and you make a presentation that's
Yep.
good. But you can also intimidate, and intentionally,
That can
like
be a
you
thing.
can go,
Yes.
oh, she already knows what she wants to do, so she's not going to hear me say that I think adding the red sparkles on whatever would make the cupcakes look so much better for the party. She's not
Right.
even going to hear that because she's decided she's putting a cherry on them, and whatever it is. And you might be totally open to the red sparkles. It's
Right.
just that they aren't hearing that
Right.
because you're confident in how
It's
you communicate.
it's about communication skills, and that's why I actually am a firm believer that every company should have ongoing training about communication and how to best create psychological safety. It should be a perpetual state of being to
Well,
to continue to work on these things on all sides, both leadership and employees.
well, exactly. And I think even maybe more so for employees sometimes, because a lot of times leaders, most leaders that I meet want to be good leaders. Like there's just a small fraction that they may not be good leaders, but they want to. Like they're open to the growth process. There's a small group of them who
Who
kind of
just aren't.
who just
Yeah.
aren't, like they either
It's
don't
just
have the
not a
skill
thing.
set,
Yeah.
or they're just too narcissistic to they're the sociopath next door, so to speak. They're not off the rails,
Right.
but they're also like the world revolves around me.
Oh yeah, the
Um,
narcissist. Yeah.
yeah, but in general, I think most people want things to flow. I do think a lot of organizations do not. I think organizations want psychological safety for people to have that from like a big C-suite
But they don't know how to
conversation.
make it. They
They don't
don't.
know how to make it because
And part of
it's a
it,
two-way street.
yeah, it is a two-way street. And part of it is to breaking your ego defense. Because the number one thing I see when I talk to organizations about inclusion, about growth and psychological safety is that they constantly have that ego defense, which is natural. It's a naturally occurring thing. But it constantly is, well, no, I'm right because, no, I'm right because, no, I'm right because, well, no, we're inclusive because, no, we're inclusive because. So first of all, I want to give this tip. If someone in your organization or on a team or whatever it is that you're doing is telling you this is not inclusive, that's a statement. It's not a question. You don't get to argue with it. They're telling you you have a hole in what you're doing. You may be trying, but there's a hole here. And I still get called out on stuff every once in a while. People will go, hey, just so you know, and they know, kind of my intent and that I want to do it. So they are usually very kind about it. Thank you all for that, for those who have corrected me. But it's that, hey, just so you know, this is the better way to do that. Great. Thank you. And if you don't understand it, then you ask questions. You respond with curiosity. Don't shut them down. And it's not just with inclusion, that's with ideas, that's with all kinds of things. You have to learn to block that ego defense. It's not an insult to you that they have a different opinion or a different thought. Like, calm down with that. People are so serious about somebody disagreeing with them.
I think for me, one of the biggest things I've value another type of happiness, is the older I get, the more the easier it is for someone to say something to me like, did you know when you said blah, 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 it came across blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, I can see that. Like that wasn't my intent at all.
Right.
But
I
can see it because and sometimes it's just it's old habits or it's old something. But like you said, if somebody feels that they're not included or they're not feeling psychologically safe, again, it's a two-way street because sometimes someone's just maybe they're not feeling psychologically safe at work because they're not psychologically safe at home, and so they have some history that they're needing to heal from, and so it doesn't really matter what you do, it triggers this insecurity but if somebody's telling you that, you still have to figure out how do you bridge it.
Yes, how do you work together?
Yes. How do we make it where I'm at least your psychologically safe work person, where you I may be the only one the only one in your life, but if you come and tell me that you're really angry at whatever, you can say it. And it's kind of like Vegas. What happens here stays here and it doesn't go anywhere.
And I hate to cut you off, Pamela, but I have a hard stop today.
Yes.
So I want to thank you so very much for joining us to talk about happiness. Psychological safety is such an important part, breaking that ego defense, standing up for yourself and learning confidence. All of these things really matter. I can't think of a better way to wrap up the season. So thank you very much for joining me. Last thing, please give us your final words of wisdom and tell us where people can find you.
Well, if you want to know the 31 types of happiness, which includes things like confidence, go to just my website, Society of Happy People, SOHP.com, and you can just sign up and get the happiness counter. And I think that's one of the best ways to increase your happiness at work is to just start recognizing some of these types of happiness that you probably don't think about.
Right. Absolutely. So where else can they find you? Are you on LinkedIn, social media? Where
LinkedIn,
else?
I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm
You're all over the place, but definitely I highly recommend connecting to Pamela. She's an absolute joy of a human. She will help you increase your happiness. Thank you all so very much for joining us this season. We'll be back in about a month. Be well, everybody. Thank you, Pam.